Chapter 1. The Invisible Shield. We all understand the concept of a physical immune system. When a virus enters the body, a quiet, invisible architecture wakes up to fight it off. You do not have to think about it, it simply goes to work. A healthy immune system does not guarantee that you will never get sick. It guarantees that when you do get sick, you have the internal resources to fight the illness, recover, and return to health. But what happens when the virus is not physical? What happens when the attack is a sudden job loss, a brutal rejection, a failed business, or a devastating personal betrayal? What happens when you wake up in the dark hours of the morning, wrestling with the terrifying feeling that you are falling behind in life? This is where we discover whether we possess the psychological equivalent of an immune system. This inner shield is the foundation of everything. It determines how high we will allow ourselves to climb and how far we will let ourselves fall before we finally fight back. This invisible shield is built on two distinct but totally inseparable foundations. The first foundation is a deep, abiding trust in your own mind. It is the conviction that you are fundamentally capable of thinking, learning, and navigating the complexities of life. You might not know the answer to a problem right now. You might be facing a challenge you have never seen before, but you possess the quiet certainty that you have the internal machinery to figure it out. You trust your own eyes. You trust your own judgment. The second foundation is the unshakable feeling that you actually deserve the rewards of your effort. It is the conviction that you have a fundamental right to be happy, to be successful, and to take up space in the world. It is the belief that your joy is not something you have to constantly apologize for. When these two elements, trust in your ability to cope and the belief in your right to be happy, come together, they form a resilient core that nothing in the external world can easily break. However, millions of people walk through life without this shield. And because the modern world demands that we project strength, those without genuine inner resilience are forced to build an illusion. Imagine a professional who has spent 20 years climbing the ladder. They wear the right clothes, drive the car that clearly signals success, and hold a title that demands immediate respect. From the outside, they look invincible, but let us look closer past the polished surface. Every morning they wake up with a quiet dread, a tight knot in their chest. They work relentlessly, not out of a joyous passion for creation, but out of a desperate, suffocating fear that if they stop moving, the world will finally discover they are an imposter. When they walk into a meeting, they are not listening to understand. They are listening to calculate how they can appear the smartest. They use their wealth, their status, and their authority not as tools for living, but as a fortress to hide behind. Then, the inevitable happens. The industry shifts. The company downsizes, and suddenly, the prestigious title is gone. The corner office is given to someone else. Because their entire sense of worth was tied up in external labels, the collapse of their career feels like the collapse of their very existence. They fall apart completely and dangerously. They do not just lose a job, they lose their identity. This is the illusion. This is what happens when we try to build an internal house using external bricks. We see the exact same illusion in relationships. Think of someone who outsources their entire inner shield to their romantic partner. They lean completely on the affection and validation of another person to feel worthy of drawing breath. If their partner is happy with them, they are soaring. If their partner is quiet or distant for an afternoon, they plunge into overwhelming anxiety. They demand that someone else do the heavy lifting of carrying their worth. It is an exhausting burden to place on another human being, and it guarantees that they will live in constant terror, forever bracing for the day the source of their value might walk out the door. Now, contrast this with someone who possesses a genuine invisible shield. Think of a person who faces a catastrophe, the catastrophic failure of a business they poured their soul into. They feel the grief. They feel the fear. They do not pretend the failure does not hurt, because genuine strength has no need for fake positivity. But beneath the temporary storm of emotion, there is a bedrock that simply does not crack. They do not look in the mirror and think, I am a failure. They think, I experienced a failure, but my mind is still intact. My capacity to learn is still here. My worth as a human being has not dropped by a single fraction. This person can breathe. They can assess the wreckage calmly, salvage what is useful, and begin laying the first brick of something new. They are resilient because their value was never stored in the business in the first place. It was safely locked inside themselves. How do you spot this genuine inner foundation in the real world? You see it in the physical body. People who are deeply grounded do not need to walk into a room and instantly dominate the conversation. Their voices do not have that strained pushing quality that comes from desperately needing to be heard. Their eyes are steady. When you speak to them, they are actually present, looking at you rather than glancing over your shoulder to see who else is in the room. Their posture is relaxed, open, and natural. They can afford to be gentle because they are not constantly bracing for an attack. They can say, "I don't know," without a shred of embarrassment. They can admit a mistake without feeling like their entire character has been destroyed. We spend so much of our lives trying to control the world outside of us. We try to manipulate our circumstances, hoard our bank accounts, and carefully curate the opinions of others, hoping that if we just get the external arrangement perfect, we will finally feel safe. But the world is inherently uncontrollable. The only true safety you will ever find is the safety you construct inside your own consciousness. The question is not how to avoid the inevitable storms of life. The question is how to build a vessel strong enough to sail through them without breaking apart. And building that vessel requires us to move from the passive hope of being saved to the active practice of awakening. Chapter 2. The Practice of Awakening. Have you ever hit the snooze button on your own life? We all know the physical sensation of waking up on a cold morning, hearing the alarm and desperately slapping the button to steal just 5 more minutes of unconsciousness. It feels so safe, so warm to just delay reality for a little while longer. But the tragedy of human existence is that we do not just do this with our sleep. We do this with our careers, our relationships, our finances, and our very souls. We sense that something is deeply wrong, we hear the quiet internal alarm going off, and we choose to pull the covers over our heads and go back to sleep. True resilience does not begin with a positive attitude. It begins with the brutal, beautiful commitment to keeping your eyes open. It is the practice of living consciously. But what does that actually mean? It is not about reaching a state of mystical enlightenment or sitting quietly on a mountaintop. Living consciously is a gritty, everyday action. It means generating a state of awareness about everything that affects your actions, your purposes, and your values to the best of your ability. And most importantly, it means behaving in accordance with what you see. There is a massive difference between having awareness and acting consciously. You can possess a brilliant intellect, you can read every philosophy book, understand human psychology, and perfectly diagnose exactly why you are unhappy. But insight without action is just another form of sleep. Understanding your problems without moving to fix them is simply a more sophisticated way of hitting the snooze button. Think about a situation we see unfold constantly in the modern world of independent work. Imagine someone who has dreamed for years of running their own creative business. They finally take the leap. For the first few months, the adrenaline carries them, but then the initial excitement fades and the hard reality of the market sets in. The revenue begins to dip. The client inquiries slow down. The bank account starts to thin out. Somewhere deep inside, a warning bell starts to ring. They know, on a profound level, that their current strategy is not working. They know they need to look at the numbers, change their approach, and perhaps make painful cuts or reach out for help. But the reality is terrifying. So, what do? They retreat into safe, trivial tasks. They spend days redesigning their logo, endlessly organizing their desk, or complaining to friends about the unfairness of the economy. They fill their calendar with busy work so they never have to sit in silence and face the truth. They are awake, walking around and working, but they are entirely unconscious. They have chosen blindness because seeing would demand painful, immediate action. Now imagine the turning point. Imagine the day this person finally stops running. They sit down at the bare desk, open the financial statements they have been avoiding, and let the harsh, uncompromising numbers stare back at them. In that moment, a wave of anxiety hits, but right behind the anxiety is a sudden, powerful rush of clarity. By turning on the lights, by refusing to pretend anymore, the paralyzing, formless dread is replaced by a concrete problem. They can finally see the edges of the monster. And once you can see the monster, you can begin to fight it. This is the raw power of living consciously. It is the choice to say, I will not pretend. I will not look away. I will deal with what is, rather than what I wish were true. This practice applies to every single facet of human existence. It applies to the way we speak to our families. Have you ever caught yourself snapping at someone you love, realizing mid-sentence that you are taking out your own stress on them, and instead of stopping, you dig in and justify it? That is a retreat from consciousness. To live consciously in that moment is to stop, take a breath, and admit the truth right there in the middle of the room. It is humiliating for the ego, but it is lifeblood for the soul. It applies to our physical health. It is the choice to acknowledge that the fatigue you feel every afternoon is not just bad luck, but the direct result of how you are treating your body and deciding to change the habit rather than drink another cup of coffee to mask the symptom. Consciousness demands action. If you realize you are in the wrong career, you cannot simply carry that realization like a heavy stone in your pocket for the next 10 years. You must begin, however slowly, to chart a new course. If you realize a relationship is draining your spirit, you must initiate the difficult conversation. The mind rebels against this because action requires energy and invites risk, but the alternative is far worse. When you refuse to act on what you know to be true, you fracture your own trust in yourself. You teach your own mind that your observations do not matter. You create a silent, ongoing betrayal of your own perception. Your inner foundation crumbles not because of the world outside, but because of the lies you tell yourself inside. Building your internal shield requires you to be an active participant in your own reality. It means checking your instruments, reading the dials, and steering the ship, even when the storm is terrifying. It is the brave decision to live in the world exactly as it is, with all its sharp edges and unyielding facts. But once you have turned on all the lights, once you have forced yourself to look clearly at the reality of your life, you face a new, even deeper challenge. You must figure out how to look at all those flaws, all those mistakes, and all those terrifying realities, and refuse to go to war with yourself. Chapter 3. The Art of Unconditional Acceptance. Turning on the lights and choosing to live consciously is a monumental step, but it immediately introduces a new and terrifying problem. When you finally turn on the lights in a room that has been dark for years, you do not always like what you see. You see the dust. You see the cracks in the walls. When you turn the light of consciousness inward, you see your own flaws, your past mistakes, your petty jealousies, and your profound insecurities. The instinctive human reaction to seeing our own darkness is to violently reject it. We go to war with ourselves. We tell ourselves that we should not feel this way, that we should be better, smarter, or stronger. But this internal war is a losing battle, and it is here that we must master the art of unconditional acceptance. To understand self-acceptance, we must first destroy the greatest misunderstanding about what the word actually means. Acceptance does not mean approval. It does not mean you look at your own bad habits, your temper, or your financial irresponsibility and say, "I am perfectly fine exactly the way I am and I never need to change." That is not acceptance. That is resignation. True acceptance is simply the refusal to deny reality. It is the willingness to look in the mirror and say, right now, in this moment, this is who I am. This is what I feel. This is what I have done. It is the act of experiencing your reality without trying to edit it, repress it, or explain it away. Think about the sheer exhaustion of carrying a secret shame. Imagine a person who has spent their entire adult life battling a quiet, desperate envy of their closest friends. Every time a friend gets a promotion, buys a house, or finds happiness, this person feels a burning knot of resentment in their stomach. Because they want to be a good person, they are horrified by their own jealousy. They tell themselves, "I am not a jealous person, I'm happy for them." They plaster on a fake smile, they send the congratulatory flowers, and they push the toxic feeling down as hard as they can, but the feeling does not disappear. It rots in the dark. It turns into passive-aggressive comments, sudden distancing, and a deep, isolating loneliness. They are entirely disconnected from their own reality because they refuse to accept the ugly truth of their own emotion. Now imagine what happens if this person stops fighting. Imagine they sit alone in a quiet room, drop the mask, and finally say the terrifying words out loud. "I am deeply, intensely jealous. I feel threatened by my friend's success because it makes me feel like a failure." In that exact moment, they are not approving of the jealousy. They are not celebrating it, but they are finally accepting it as a fact. And a miraculous thing happens when you accept a dark fact about yourself. It loses its power to control you blindly. You cannot dismantle a bomb while pretending it does not exist. You can only carefully defuse it once you acknowledge it is sitting right there in the center of the room. By accepting their jealousy, they can finally examine it, understand where it comes from, and begin the hard work of healing their own bruised ego. Acceptance is the absolute prerequisite for any meaningful change. We must extend this radical acceptance to our physical bodies, our intellect, our age, and our past mistakes. You cannot turn back the clock and undo the terrible financial decision you made 10 years ago that set your family back. Beating yourself up for a decade, calling yourself an idiot every time you look at your bank account, does not recover a single dollar. It only shreds your internal foundation. You must accept the history. I made that choice. I was foolish. It caused pain. Once the reality is fully absorbed without evasion and without self-hatred, you free up all that wasted emotional energy to start building anew. But self-acceptance goes even deeper than acknowledging our flaws. It is also the commitment to be fundamentally on your own side. It means being a friend to yourself. When a good friend comes to you, devastated after making a colossal mistake, you do not typically stand over them and scream that they are worthless. You sit beside them. You acknowledge the gravity of what happened, but you offer compassion. You separate their core value as a human being from the foolishness of their action. Yet, when we make mistakes, the voice in our own head is often infinitely more cruel than any enemy we will ever face. To build an unbreakable internal shield, you must become your own strongest advocate. You must adopt the unwavering stance that even when you fail, even when you act poorly, even when you are lost, you are still fundamentally worthy of your own compassion. This does not mean letting yourself off the hook. A true friend holds you accountable. But a true friend never abandons you in the dark. This level of acceptance requires immense courage. It is much easier to point fingers at the world, to blame your parents, the economy, or your boss for the state of your life. Blaming others protects the ego, but it keeps you entirely powerless. When you accept yourself, you gather all the fragmented pieces of your identity, the good, the bad, the heroic, and the cowardly, and you claim them as your own. You stop waiting for someone else to validate you, and you stop running from your own shadow. And once you have accepted every part of who you are and what you have done, you are finally ready to step into the heaviest, most powerful arena of human life. You are ready to stop being a passenger in your own existence and take hold of the wheel. You are ready for the burden and the absolute freedom of total ownership. Chapter 4. The Burden and Freedom of Ownership. There is a specific, defining moment in every human life when a harsh and unbreakable truth finally comes into focus. No one is coming to save you. When we are children, our entire survival depends on someone else stepping in to fix our problems. If we are hungry, someone feeds us. If we are lost, someone finds us. If we are hurt, someone bandages the wound. But as we grow older, a dangerous illusion takes root. We develop physically, we enter the adult world, and we take on adult responsibilities. But deep in the hidden corners of our minds, many of us are still secretly waiting for the rescue. We wait for the perfect mentor to discover our hidden talents. We wait for a romantic partner to finally make us feel complete. We wait for the economy to shift so our lives can become easier. We spend decades sitting in a psychological waiting room, completely handing over the pen that writes our life story to the people and circumstances around us. To build an unshakable internal foundation, we must shatter this illusion completely. We must adopt the profound practice of total self-responsibility. Taking ownership of your life is not merely about admitting when you have made a mistake, though that is certainly part of it. True self-responsibility is a fundamental orientation toward your entire existence. It is the absolute acceptance that you are the sole author of your choices, your actions, your values, and your ultimate happiness. Consider a deeply common tragedy of unfulfilled potential. Picture a professional who possesses genuine talent and fierce ambition. For years, they have been stagnant in a career that barely utilizes half of their capability. If you sit across from them at a dinner table, they will give you a remarkably convincing, articulate explanation for why they are stuck. They will explain that the industry is rigged against people like them. They will describe a management structure that is blind to true innovation. They will tell you about the terrible timing of the market, the unfair advantages given to their peers, and the lack of resources at their disposal. Every single one of these complaints might contain a grain of factual truth. But by stringing these truths together to form an impenetrable wall of excuses, they cast themselves as the tragic, helpless victim of a story written by someone else. Years pass in this state of paralyzed bitterness. The energy that could have been used to build something new is entirely consumed by the exhausting effort of defending their lack of momentum. Their life becomes a monument to what could have been, if only the world had treated them fairly. This is the comfort of victimhood. It is incredibly warm and safe to believe that your failures are not your fault, because if the problem is out there, then the solution is out there too. And if the solution is out there, you are completely off the hook. You never have to take the terrifying risk of stepping into the arena and trying your hardest, because you have already decided the game is rigged. Now, imagine the agonizing but beautiful moment of awakening for this individual. Imagine they finally grow entirely sick of their own voice complaining. They look at the years slipping away and they accept the terrifying weight of ownership. They realize that even if the industry is flawed, even if their boss is incompetent, and even if the market is brutal, their response to those conditions is entirely their own responsibility. No one owes them a promotion. No one owes them an audience. No one owes them success. In an instant, the comforting blanket of blame is ripped away and they are left standing naked in the reality of their own choices. At first, this realization feels like a crushing weight. If you are responsible for the stagnation, then the wasted time is on your hands. But right on the other side of that crushing weight is the ultimate intoxicating rush of human freedom. If you are the one responsible for the mess, you're also the one entirely empowered to clean it up. You do not have to wait for the management team to change. You can change your environment. You do not have to wait for permission to be creative. You can build your own platform. By taking the blame for the current state of your life, you simultaneously take complete control of its future direction. This level of ownership extends to the deepest parts of the human heart. You must realize that no one on this earth is responsible for your happiness. It is a profoundly unfair burden to place on a spouse, a friend, or a child to demand that they fill the empty spaces inside your soul. When you take responsibility for your own joy, your relationships transform from desperate transactions into genuine partnerships. You stop looking at the people around you as emotional life rafts and start seeing them as fellow travelers. Accepting that no one is coming is not a tragedy. It is the starting gun of your actual life. It means the waiting is finally over. The rescue mission has been cancelled, which means you are now authorized to save yourself. But once you realize you are the one driving the vehicle, you can no longer remain quiet in the driver's seat. Once you own your reality, you will inevitably encounter friction from a world that wants you to remain small. And when that friction comes, you must learn how to stand your ground. Chapter 5. Stepping into the light. There is a quiet, almost imperceptible tragedy that happens millions of times a day in offices, living rooms, and relationships around the world. It is the tragedy of the unsaid word, the swallowed objection, and the forced smile. We are often taught from a very young age that the highest virtue a human being can possess is to be accommodating. We are told to be easy to work with, to go with the flow, and to never make anyone else feel uncomfortable. While cooperation is necessary for society to function, a dangerous confusion often takes hold. We begin to mistake the systematic erasure of our own identity for kindness. To possess an unbreakable internal foundation, you must master the profound practice of stepping into the light. This means developing the absolute willingness to honor your own wants, your needs, and your values, and seeking appropriate forms of their expression in reality. It is the practice of self-assertiveness. Assertiveness is a concept that is universally misunderstood. When people hear the word, they often picture someone who is loud, combative, and domineering. They imagine someone who walks into a room and immediately begins barking orders, knocking over the boundaries of everyone else just to prove they are in charge. But that is not assertiveness. That is aggression. Aggression is driven by a deep, panicked need to control others. Genuine assertiveness is driven by a calm, unshakable commitment to controlling yourself. It is not about walking over someone else's boundary line. It is simply drawing your own boundary line in the sand and quietly saying, "This is where I stand, and I will not retreat from this space." Think about someone who has spent years perfecting the art of blending in. Imagine a highly skilled creative professional, perhaps a writer or a designer, sitting in a high-stakes meeting. The client across the table is demanding a direction that the professional knows in their bones will completely ruin the project. The professional feels that familiar, suffocating tightening in their chest. The entire room is looking at them, waiting for the easy, agreeable yes. The path of least resistance is wide open. All they have to do is nod, swallow their expertise, and accept the paycheck. For years, this is exactly what they have done. And every single time they have said yes to something they knew was wrong, they felt a small, painful fracture in their own self-respect. They saved the meeting, but they betrayed themselves. But imagine today is different. Imagine this professional takes a deep breath, looks the client directly in the eye, and refuses to shrink. They do not raise their voice. They do not insult the client's intelligence. They simply state with absolute clarity, "I hear what you are asking for, but if we proceed in that direction, we will compromise the entire foundation of the work. It will fail, and I cannot put my name on a strategy I know is flawed. We must find another way." The immediate aftermath of a moment like this is almost always terrifying. The room goes dead silent. The client might bristle. The tension spikes. This is the friction of stepping into reality. But notice what happens inside the mind of the professional. Even if their hands are shaking under the table, an incredible rush of psychological oxygen floods their system. For the first time in a long time, they exist in the room as a full, three-dimensional human being, not just an echo of what someone else wanted them to be. They honored their own consciousness. They did not abandon themselves to keep the peace. When you consistently fail to assert yourself, you commit a form of psychological treason. Every time you smile politely at a disrespectful comment, every time you take on a massive burden of work that is not yours because you are afraid to say no, you are sending a devastating message to your own brain. You are telling yourself that your thoughts, your time, and your dignity are secondary to the comfort of a stranger. Over time, your internal foundation rots away, replaced by a hollow, bitter resentment. You become angry at the world for walking all over you, conveniently forgetting that you were the one who laid down and offered yourself as the doormat. The greatest fear that keeps us hiding in the shadows is the fear of rejection. We believe that if we show our true faces, if we state our actual opinions, or if we demand the respect we deserve, people will abandon us. And the hard truth is, some of them will. When you stop bending over backward to accommodate people who take advantage of you, those people will naturally fall away. But this is not a loss. It is a cleansing. The paradox of hiding your true self to gain love and acceptance is that it fundamentally prevents you from ever experiencing either. If you wear a mask your entire life, and people love the mask, you remain entirely alone underneath it. You live in constant anxiety because you know that their affection is entirely conditional on your performance. It is only when you step into the light with all your rough edges, your firm boundaries, and your unapologetic truth that you can be genuinely respected. You trade the cheap comfort of universal approval for the profound, unshakable power of authenticity. Once you learn how to stand your ground, once you stop shrinking to fit into rooms that are too small for you, a vast horizon suddenly opens up. You have reclaimed your energy. You have established your right to exist. But having a strong stance is only half the equation. You must now decide what you are going to do with this strength. You must give your life a direction. Chapter 6. The Architecture of Purpose. Imagine two objects in the middle of the ocean. One is a piece of driftwood, and the other is a sailing ship. The driftwood is entirely at the mercy of the environment. If the current pulls north, the driftwood goes north. If a storm hits, it is tossed violently into the air. It is moving, sometimes very fast, but it has no destination. The sailing ship, on the other hand, experiences the exact same wind and the exact same currents, but it has a rudder, a captain, and a destination. It uses the tension of the wind to cut across the current and move deliberately toward a specific harbor. The tragedy of the modern world is that millions of people are living like driftwood, but they have convinced themselves they are sailing ships. They wake up, check their phones, react to emails, respond to the demands of their bosses, and fulfill the expectations of their families. They are incredibly busy. They are moving very fast. But if you stop them and ask, where exactly are you trying to go? You will often be met with a blank stare. They are experiencing movement, but they are not experiencing progress. To build an unbreakable internal foundation, you must stop drifting. You must master the practice of living purposefully. Living purposefully is the ultimate translation of your internal desires into external reality. It is the death of the someday mentality. We all know the profound danger of someday. You probably know someone, or perhaps you have been this person, who has carried a magnificent dream in their heart for a decade. Let us picture someone who dreams of building an independent life, perhaps starting their own business and escaping a career that drains their soul. They talk about it with passion. They can see the end game perfectly. The freedom of managing their own time, the pride of ownership, the relief of true financial independence. But if you look closely at the actual architecture of their daily life, a painful contradiction reveals itself. They finish their day job, come home, and instead of spending one focused hour laying a single brick for their new foundation, they collapse onto the couch. They spend the evening scrolling through social media, watching others live out the very dreams they hold, or binging television to numb the quiet ache of stagnation. They might buy a new planner, read an inspiring article, or redesign a logo in their mind, confusing the intoxicating feeling of planning with the gritty, unglamorous act of doing. Years pass. The dream remains pristine and untouched, while the reality of their life slowly decays. This happens because they have misunderstood what purpose actually is. Purpose is not a feeling. Purpose is not a grand destiny that the universe hands to you. Purpose is an architecture. It is the ruthless, deliberate organization of your behavior to achieve a specific outcome. If you want to write a book, your purpose is not the bestseller list. Your purpose is sitting in a chair at 6 in the morning and staring at a blank screen until the words come out. If you want a healthy relationship, your purpose is not a romantic movie ending. Your purpose is the difficult, awkward conversation you initiate tonight to resolve a lingering resentment. To live purposefully means that you hold yourself fully accountable for your goals. It demands that you constantly ask yourself a terrifying set of questions. What am I trying to achieve right now? Is the action I am taking in this exact moment moving me closer to that goal or further away? And if my current strategy is not working, what am I going to do about it? It is completely natural to feel overwhelmed by this level of continuous self-correction. The mind wants to go on autopilot because autopilot burns fewer calories. It is exhausting to pay attention, but the price of checking out is far too high. When you live without purpose, you hand the steering wheel of your life over to chance, to the economy, and to the agendas of other people. You become a supporting character in someone else's story rather than the author of your own. There is a vital distinction we must make here. We must not confuse being endlessly productive with living purposefully. Society often rewards us for being efficient, but efficiency is meaningless if you are traveling in the wrong direction. You can be the hardest working, most productive person in your company, climbing the corporate ladder with breathtaking speed. But if you reach the top of the ladder and realize it was leaning against the wrong wall, if you realize you sacrificed your health, your family, and your spirit for a title you do not even want, your efficiency was simply a faster way to destroy your own happiness. True purpose requires periods of profound stillness. It requires you to step back from the noise of the world and interrogate your own desires. Are the goals you are chasing genuinely your own, or did you absorb them from your parents, your peers, or the culture around you? When you finally identify the pursuits that resonate with your deepest self, and you begin to align your daily habits with those pursuits, a remarkable shift happens. You stop needing external motivation. You stop needing someone to hype you up. The clarity of your direction generates its own boundless energy. But charting the course and steering the ship brings us to the final and perhaps most difficult internal challenge. It is one thing to set a goal and begin moving toward it. It is entirely another thing to hold the line when the storms come, the temptations arise, and no one is watching. The architecture of your purpose is only as strong as the materials you use to build it, and the strongest material in the human soul is the willingness to keep your word to yourself. Chapter 7. The Alignment of Character. We have explored the internal mechanics of building your mental shield, opening your eyes to reality, accepting your deepest flaws, taking total ownership of your life, standing your ground, and steering your ship with purpose. But there is a final, critical piece of internal architecture. It is the mortar that holds all the other bricks together. Without it, the entire structure will inevitably collapse under pressure. This final internal element is the alignment of your character, and it is forged in the silent, empty rooms of your life when absolutely no one is watching. We often think of integrity as a public virtue. We picture someone returning a lost wallet, or a whistleblower exposing a corrupt corporation, or a leader standing up for a marginalized group. Those are certainly acts of integrity, but true personal integrity is much quieter and infinitely more demanding. It is simply the unbroken alignment between your behavior and your professed convictions. It is the refusal to fracture yourself into two different people, the one who speaks noble ideals and the one who compromises those ideals the moment it becomes convenient. To understand the brutal reality of personal integrity, think of someone who makes a massive private commitment to their own future. Imagine an independent creator who decides to take control of their destiny by launching a grueling 100-day challenge. They commit to creating and uploading a new high-quality piece of work every single day for 100 days straight. They write this promise down. They know that this sustained effort is the only way to break through their own plateau. For the first 2 weeks, the adrenaline carries them. The excitement of the new project fuels late nights and early mornings. But then, fast forward to day 40. The initial thrill is completely dead. The audience engagement has been painfully slow. On this particular evening, they are physically exhausted from their day job, their head is pounding, and the creative well feels completely dry. They look at the clock, and it is almost midnight. At this exact moment, the human mind, which is a master of self-preservation, begins to offer a series of incredibly rational, comforting excuses. The mind whispers, "You are tired. You have worked hard enough. If you skip just one single day, nobody is going to notice. The algorithm will not punish you. Your friends will not care. You can just do 2 tomorrow." Every single one of these justifications is entirely logical. The external world is giving them a free pass to quit for the night. But there is a silent watcher in the room, and that watcher is their own consciousness. If this creator closes the laptop and goes to sleep, the world will not end. But a tiny, invisible tragedy will occur inside their own mind. They will have taught themselves that their word is completely negotiable. They will have demonstrated, through undeniable physical action, that their comfort is more important than their commitment. When they wake up the next morning, they will carry a subtle, heavy layer of shame. The next time they try to set a goal, the silent watcher will remember the betrayal on day 40, and an internal voice will whisper, "We both know you are not actually going to finish this." Now, imagine the alternative. Imagine the creator feels the exact same exhaustion, hears the exact same comforting excuses, but refuses to surrender. They sit down at the desk, open the laptop, and force themselves through the agonizing resistance. The work they produce that night might not be their masterpiece, but they finish it, and they hit upload. In that singular moment, they do not just publish a piece of content, they forge a rod of iron in their own spine. They prove to the silent watcher that they cannot be broken by their own fatigue. This is the profound practice of personal integrity. It is the unbroken habit of keeping the promises you make to yourself. When you live a life of high integrity, you generate a level of internal peace that money cannot buy and status cannot replicate. You do not have to waste energy keeping track of your lies. You do not have to constantly look over your shoulder, terrified that the world will discover you are a fraud, because there is no fraud to discover. The person you present to the world is the exact same person you are in the dark. This alignment requires a powerful underlying philosophy. It requires you to adopt a worldview where you view your own mind, your own character, and your own life as your highest moral values. It means you stop treating yourself as a sacrificial animal, forever compromising your beliefs to avoid conflict. It is a moral triumph to look at a chaotic, compromising world and say, "I will not participate in my own destruction. I will protect my character fiercely." Hypocrisy is the great destroyer of the human soul. When you preach the value of hard work to your team, but you secretly cut corners, your team might not know it, but your subconscious records the theft. When you demand honesty from your romantic partner, but you consistently hide your own financial habits from them, you shatter your own foundation. You cannot demand from the world what you refuse to demand from yourself. We have spent these chapters building the ultimate internal fortress. We have forged the invisible shield of self-respect. But a healthy human being does not live forever in isolation inside a fortress. Eventually, we must lower the drawbridge and step out into the world. We must interact with the people we love, the people we lead, and the society we inhabit. Now that your internal foundation is set, we must examine how this power translates outward. The first and most critical test of this translation is how we shape the minds of the people coming after us. Chapter 8. Shaping the Future. We do not build an unbreakable internal shield simply to sit alone in a fortress, isolated from the rest of humanity. The ultimate purpose of developing your own mind, of practicing radical acceptance, and of stepping into the light is to prepare yourself to engage with the world. And the most profound, terrifying, and beautiful arena where you will test your internal foundation is in the presence of the next generation. Whether you are a parent, an aunt, an uncle, a teacher, or a mentor, you hold the power to either construct or destroy the psychological architecture of the children around you. When a human being enters this world, they arrive completely vulnerable, entirely dependent, and without an established internal shield. They do not yet know if their minds are capable of understanding reality. They do not yet know if they are inherently worthy of love. To answer these massive existential questions, a child looks up at the giants in the room. They look at the adults, and they do not listen to the lectures we give them. They absorb the reality of who we are. There is a devastating misconception that we can teach resilience to a child while secretly drowning in our own anxieties. We believe we can read them a bedtime story about courage while spending our days shrinking from conflict and apologizing for our own existence. But children are brilliant, subconscious detectives. They can detect the gap between what you say and how you live with terrifying accuracy. If you are constantly terrified of the world, if you collapse under pressure, and if you treat your own mistakes with brutal self-hatred, you will quietly transmit that exact same fragility to the child, regardless of the cheerful words you use. The absolute prerequisite for nurturing the foundation of a child is the relentless commitment to continuing your own internal work. The greatest gift you can give the next generation is your own healed mind. To understand how this invisible transfer of strength actually happens, we have to look closely at the mundane, everyday interactions where a child's worldview is forged. Imagine a busy kitchen on a Tuesday evening. A 7-year-old child is trying to help set the table, carrying a stack of plates. They trip, the plates crash to the floor and shatter into 100 pieces. In that split second, the child freezes. Their nervous system spikes. They have encountered reality, they have made a mistake, and they are now waiting to see how the world responds. Imagine an adult whose own internal foundation is fractured. They are exhausted, stressed about money, and living entirely on edge. At the sound of the crash, the adult explodes. They scream, "What is wrong with you? Why are you so clumsy? Look at the mess you made." Notice what is happening here. The adult is not just addressing the broken plates, they are attacking the child's fundamental identity. The adult is entirely consumed by their own inconvenience, projecting their own lack of emotional control onto the child. In the mind of that 7-year-old, a dark, dangerous brick is laid. When I make a mistake, I am broken. I am a burden. The world is volatile and my actions bring catastrophe. Now, rewrite that exact same scenario with an adult who possesses genuine internal strength. The plates crash. The adult is equally tired. They are equally annoyed that they now have to sweep the floor. But because they possess the capacity to separate a simple accident from a global crisis, they take a breath. They walk over, look at the terrified child and say, "Okay, the plates are broken. Are you hurt? No? Good. Let us get the broom and clean this up." The psychological difference between these two reactions is the difference between life and death for the child's spirit. In the second scenario, the adult holds the child strictly responsible for reality. They have to clean up the mess, but they completely protect the child's self-respect. The child learns an unbelievably powerful lesson. Mistakes are just events. They are not indictments of my character. Problems can be solved. I am safe, and I am capable of fixing what I break. This is how you pass on the invisible shield. You demonstrate that reality is manageable. But the home is only the first training ground. Eventually, the child must leave the house and enter a much larger, more chaotic arena, the classroom. A school is not just a building where facts are memorized. It is a psychological crucible. It is the place where a child's mind is tested in public. and the adults who stand at the front of those rooms wield a power that can alter the trajectory of a human life forever. Think about a teenager sitting in a high school mathematics class. They are struggling. The concepts look like a foreign language on the board. The teacher asks a question, and this teenager, summoning every ounce of courage they have, raises their hand and gives an answer. The answer is completely, fundamentally wrong. A few kids in the back row chuckle. If the teacher rolls their eyes, sighs impatiently, or simply moves on to the smart kid in the front row without addressing the struggle, the teenager feels a flush of burning humiliation. They learn that the classroom is a dangerous place, that their mind is inadequate, and that the penalty for trying and failing is public shame. They will likely never raise their hand again. They will begin to hide. But imagine a teacher who understands their true role. This teacher hears the wrong answer, silences the laughter with a single look, and walks toward the student. They do not coddle the student or pretend the wrong answer is right, because protecting a child from the truth destroys their trust in their own mind. Instead, the teacher says, "You are looking at the problem from the wrong angle, but I see how you got there. Walk me through your first step." The teacher validates the effort. They reward the process of thinking rather than just the final result. When an adult treats a young person's mind with profound respect, the young person learns to respect themselves. They begin to view their intellect as a muscle that can be developed, rather than a fixed trait that they either possess or lack. They learn that confusion is not a sign of stupidity, but the necessary first step of learning. If we want to build a culture of innovation, courage, and immense human warmth, we cannot achieve it through policy alone. We achieve it by raising human beings who are firmly grounded in their own right to exist. We achieve it by speaking to children not as fragile pets to be managed, but as capable, reasoning beings who are worthy of dignity. When we successfully impart this strength, we send them out into the adult world fully equipped. They will leave our homes and our classrooms, and they will walk into the brutal, demanding arenas of commerce, careers, and the relentless pursuit of their own survival. And it is in that adult arena that the invisible shield faces its ultimate daily test. Chapter 9. The Arena of Work and Healing. We spend the vast majority of our waking adult lives engaged in some form of labor. Whether you are running a multinational corporation, working on a factory floor, or building an independent creative business from your kitchen table, the workplace is not merely a mechanism for financial survival. It is the ultimate unforgiving mirror of our internal psychological architecture. Every email you send, every piece of feedback you receive, and every risk you take or avoid is a direct reflection of the invisible shield you carry inside. When a person enters the professional arena without a solid foundation of self-respect, the results are universally destructive, though they often hide behind the guise of ambition. Imagine a department head who has spent years clawing their way to middle management. On paper, they are successful, but internally, they are running on a terrifying deficit. Because they do not genuinely believe they are capable or worthy, they view every single person on their team not as a collaborator, but as a mortal threat. You have likely worked for someone exactly like this. They hoard information because making themselves indispensable is the only way they feel safe. They micromanage every tiny detail of their subordinates' work, crushing any spark of independent thought, because if a junior employee outshines them, their fragile ego would completely collapse. When a project succeeds, this manager is the first to stand up in the boardroom and absorb all the praise. But the moment a project fails, they immediately turn around and brutally sacrifice their own team to protect themselves. They operate from a place of sheer, unadulterated fear. They are not leading. They are surviving a daily psychological war of their own making. Now contrast this with a professional who walks into the exact same office, facing the exact same market pressures, but who possesses a deeply anchored internal foundation. This person does not need their job title to prove they have a right to exist. Because their worth is safely secured internally, they experience an incredible, liberating freedom. The freedom to hire people who are vastly smarter than they are. They do not feel diminished by the brilliance of others. They are excited by it. When this grounded leader makes a mistake, and they will, because they are actively engaging with reality, they do not spin a web of lies to cover it up. They simply look at their team and say, "I made the wrong call on that strategy. Here is why it failed, and here is how we are going to pivot." By bringing the failure into the light without shame, They instantly neutralize the fear in the room. They create a culture where innovation is actually possible, because the penalty for trying and failing is not public humiliation. They treat their colleagues with profound respect because they respect themselves. But what happens when you look in the mirror and realize that your foundation is the one that is cracking? What happens when the pressure of your career, the breakdown of your relationships, or a creeping heavy depression finally brings you to your knees? This is the moment where the professional arena intersects with the deeply personal arena of healing. For generations, there has been a heavy stigma attached to the idea of seeking psychological help. We have wrongly categorized it as a surrender, a public admission of weakness. But if you truly understand the practice of taking total ownership of your life, you realize that seeking a structured environment for healing is one of the most fiercely responsible actions a human being can take. It is the refusal to bleed on people who did not cut you. It is the active decision to stop running from your own shadows. However, a dangerous misconception often paralyzes people when they finally walk into a healer's office. Many people sit down in the chair, exhausted and broken, and mentally hand the steering wheel over to the professional sitting across from them. They treat the process like taking a car to a mechanic. Here is my broken history, here is my anxiety, here is my lack of momentum. Please fix me, give me the answers, and tell me when I'm cured. But the human mind cannot be repaired by a spectator. A genuine journey of healing is not something that is done to you. It is an arena where you must actively fight. The person sitting across from you cannot magically inject you with resilience. They cannot lift the weights for you. What they provide is a safe, fiercely honest environment where you can finally stop lying to yourself. They hold up the mirror so you can look at the terrified, angry, or neglected parts of your own soul without blinking. Inside that quiet room, you must begin to practice the very pillars we have discussed, but under heavy resistance. You must practice living consciously by finally naming the traumas or failures you have spent a decade suppressing. You must practice self-acceptance by looking at your most regrettable behaviors and finding compassion for the version of you that committed them. You must practice self-assertiveness by learning to set boundaries, sometimes with the very people you love the most, in order to protect your newly forming peace. Healing is a grueling, unglamorous, and often painful process. It requires you to dismantle the defense mechanisms that kept you alive during your darkest days, because the armor you wore to survive the war is the exact same armor that is preventing you from experiencing joy in times of peace. But as you do this work, something miraculous happens. The energy that you previously spent bracing for impact, hiding your flaws, and projecting a fake image of strength is suddenly released back into your system. You return to your career, your creative projects, and your relationships with a quiet, undeniable gravity. You are no longer easily knocked off balance by criticism, and you no longer need constant applause to feel steady. By facing the hardest parts of your own mind, you forge a version of yourself that is finally ready to stand fully upright in the world. And when a critical mass of human beings commit to this level of personal ownership, integrity, and healing, the impact cannot be contained within a single office or a single home. The energy spills outward, entirely changing the fabric of the world we share. Chapter 10. The Ultimate Integration. We often look at the culture around us, the political divisions, the relentless negativity of the daily news, the harshness of social media, and we feel a profound sense of powerlessness. We view culture as a massive, unstoppable weather system that simply happens to us, a heavy atmosphere that we are forced to breathe. But a culture is not a force of nature. It is not an entity with its own independent mind. A culture is simply the combined, collective reflection of the internal psychological foundations of the individuals living inside it. When you live in a society largely populated by individuals who lack a genuine internal shield, you see the immediate external symptoms everywhere. People who are terrified of their own inadequacy become obsessed with conformity. They construct communities based on mutual policing, where anyone who steps out of line, anyone who attempts to rise above the average, is immediately torn down. Think of a hyper-competitive, toxic neighborhood or a cynical online community. The operating currency in these spaces is criticism and outrage. The people in these environments do not possess the internal strength to build their own magnificent lives, so they dedicate their energy to ensuring that no one else is allowed to build one either. They mistake dragging others down for lifting themselves up. But what happens when the equation changes? What happens when a single person, and then a dozen, and then 1,000 people commit to the grueling, glorious work of taking total ownership of their own minds? When a human being builds an unshakable internal foundation, they no longer need to feed on the failures of their neighbors to feel tall. Because they trust their own capacity to navigate reality, they do not require everyone around them to think exactly the same way they do. They can encounter a different opinion without feeling like their very existence is under attack. A culture populated by self-respecting individuals is a culture of immense freedom, boundless innovation, and profound mutual respect. By doing the quiet, invisible work in the dark corners of your own soul, you are not just saving yourself, you are slowly, incrementally shifting the gravity of the entire world. Yet, as we reach the summit of this journey, we must recognize that all the practices we have discussed, living with your eyes open, accepting your flaws, taking total responsibility, standing your ground, and moving with deliberate purpose, are ultimately just tools. They are the mechanics of a strong mind. But an engine, no matter how perfectly engineered, cannot run without a spark. There must be a fundamental energy that animates all of this effort. This ultimate integration is an uncompromising, fierce, and passionate love for your own existence. We are often subtly taught that to love your own life too much is a form of arrogance or selfishness. Society frequently demands that we perform a kind of polite misery, a gentle martyrdom, to prove that we are good people. We are expected to apologize for our joy, downplay our successes, and constantly broadcast our exhaustion as proof that we are working hard enough. But true goodness does not require your suffering. The highest moral achievement of a human being is not to suffer quietly, but to actively, vibrantly flourish. To truly love your life means that you look at the fleeting, incredibly brief window of time you have been given on this earth, and you refuse to waste it living someone else's script. Imagine an individual in the twilight of their life sitting quietly on a porch looking back over the decades. There are two very different ways this quiet moment can play out. The first person looks back and sees a life perfectly curated to avoid criticism. They never made a major mistake because they never took a major risk. They stayed in the safe job. They swallowed their true opinions to keep the peace, and they faithfully served the expectations of their parents, their peers, and their society. From the outside, their life was a picture of responsible compliance, but internally, they are haunted by the heavy, suffocating ghosts of what could have been. They survived, but they never truly stepped into the arena. Now imagine the second person. They sit on that same porch, but their memories are radically different. They remember the terrifying day they quit a soul-crushing career to start something of their own. They remember the painful, honest conversations that saved their marriage. They remember the times they failed publicly, the times they had to rebuild from zero, and the times they stood alone against a crowd. They bear the psychological scars of a life actually lived in contact with reality. But as they watch the sun go down, there is no bitterness, no regret, and no wondering what if. They experience a profound, sweeping peace, because they know they squeezed every single drop of potential out of the time they were given. They honored their own consciousness. This is the ultimate goal. You do not build a shield so you can hide behind it. You build it so you can step boldly out from behind it and engage with the world. You construct this internal architecture so that when the inevitable storms of life hit, when the economy turns, when illness strikes, or when tragedy occurs, you are not swept away. You bend, you grieve, you learn, but your core remains intact. The work of maintaining this foundation is never truly finished. There will always be mornings where you want to close your eyes to reality. There will always be moments where the temptation to blame someone else for your problems is nearly overwhelming. And there will always be rooms where it feels incredibly dangerous to assert your true self. The journey is not about reaching a magical state of permanent perfection. It is about the daily, gritty commitment to returning to your center over and over again. You have the tools. You understand the architecture. The waiting room is closed and the rescue mission is cancelled because you are now fully equipped to be your own champion. The path forward is yours to define, your mind is yours to trust, and your life is yours to conquer.